talking of gladdening men's hearts in an albeit much more prosaic sense, there's an author, Ted Bruning, who is part of the Campaign for Real Ale, one of the few instances of sort of wholesome grassroots political campaigning in the last few decades, who wrote a book, Merry England, The Medieval Roots of the Great English Pub, where he offers a very interesting, slightly speculative case for the Catholic origins of that most beloved of English institutions. I think this is something that people should know about, and again comes back to that inchoate love that the English have for certain institutions, and not realizing that is because of their Christian origins. So he points to two major sources of the medieval ale house. The first is evidence of a piece of legislation under King Edgar, who ruled from 959 to 975, quote, "By the advice of St. Dunstan, put down many ale houses, suffering only one to be in a village or small town." And then we have supporting evidence of a decree issued by Ethelred the Unready in the closing years of the 10th century, who fixed a fine for public brawling. He said, quote, "And if anyone brawls in an ale house," obviously it's in Old English translated, "and if anyone brawls in an ale house so that someone is killed, he shall pay 6 half marks, or if no one is killed, 12 ore." End quote. So there's some evidence there that the old mead hall, the kindred hall of Anglo-Saxon society, was Christianized and was transformed into the pub, the ale house, directly through the action of the Archbishop of Canterbury, St. Dunstan, and former abbot of Glastonbury, in fact. And that perhaps, we can only conjecture, but perhaps there was an opportunity or an idea here to abolish the kindred hall, where feuds between families might be nurtured and intra-communal violence stirred up, and replace it with this single communal focus that incidentally was established in the 10th century here, seemingly at the same time that parish churches were established. So these twin institutions of English life, the parish church and the parish ale house, that both have St. Dunstan for their author.
Well, that's very interesting because I mean, you may just have mentioned, but St. Dunstan's probably one of the most famous abbots of Glastonbury, and also the patron saint of alchemists. He's a deeply fascinating and mysterious character. I think that idea is probably got some very deep insight. I'm reminded of Sir Roger Scruton's work, I Drink, Therefore I Am, in which he talks about how as Christian culture, unlike Islamic culture, has a place for alcohol, it has done more to break down the kind of tribal, intra-tribal feuding that's such a feature of man's natural disposition. And so it seems like this is an obvious instantiation of that over a glass of wine, there's a quasi-sacramental. I'm reminded of Benedict XVI writing of the meal as the proto-sacrament. This seems like an extension of that over a glass of wine, there is the ability to break down hostility and the ability to create friendships that is at the roots of binding together what were originally enemy peoples. So the Saxons, the Angles, the Britons, the Celts, and eventually the Normans, they're all different tribal peoples with their own interests and their own characteristics. Famously, St. Bede told us that the Britons were massive cowards and ran away from every fight, whereas the Saxons were incredible warriors and just took what was theirs. Well, how is it that they ended living in peace and ended up living in peace together and worshipping in the same churches? Well, it would have been partly through religion and through the binding together of the common life of the sacraments. But that extends further, as you say, into social life. And how is that better exemplified among European peoples than over a glass of wine or an excellent beer? So it doesn't, that analysis does not in any way seem to me to be unreasonable, and I think in keeping with the kind of insights. And of course, you mustn't forget that European peoples were the inheritors of Greek philosophy, which had in its inner sanctum the mystery cults, which had their own rituals surrounding wine and spirituality of alcoholic beverages. And I think, although that didn't explicitly get transmitted in any kind of doctrinal form, those attitudes don't just disappear from people, and was very much a feature all across the European continent.
Yes, and of course, Aristotle wrote in the Politics about how friendship is the foundation of the polis. And it strikes me that the English pub as an institution is a kind of institutionalizing of our Lord's teaching that one should settle a quarrel with one's brother before you go to court. That English pubs have been described as sort of little parliaments where we come to peace over our disputes rather than fighting. Of course, there's a little bit of fighting as well, but they are the place of conversation, of peacemaking, and of local politics. It's where local politics is done, which then, of course, was instantiated on the national level through the first English Parliament, which I've argued owes its model to the Dominican Constitution.
Very interesting. And it's also worth bearing in mind that pubs weren't simply places for social gathering at the end of the day or the end of the week, but that in the medieval period, when it wasn't always easily available to have clean water to hand, fermented drinks provide not only safe ways of taking on liquid, but also especially in terms of beer, highly calorific drinks, which would give laborers the power they needed to work the fields. Really high quality monastic beers still have this feature. It's like drinking bread. You get the same nutrients, and you get lots of calories easily available, and so everybody would be in and out of the pubs basically all day, for every time, sort of to replenish the liquids in your body, the sweat of your brow. Pop down to the pub, grab some liquid bread, and so it bound society together through both work and leisure. And I suppose there's a sort of mysterious blurring of the boundaries between work and leisure, which is the ideal. It's not strictly segregated in the almost prison-like sense that we have today, where you work all year round for 4 weeks of break period. That there's a much more relaxed ebbing and flowing between the two, a diffusion of one into the other.
Yes, Catholic culture is integrated.
Right, exactly, a true integration.
I'm sure that English ale, that monastic ale, fueled the building of the English Gothic cathedrals with that sustenance, as you say. And this is where sorry.
I was only going to say, if you look at some of the images that they carved into the sides of their cathedrals, I have absolutely no doubt that the craftsmen were well lubricated.
Right, exactly. England was merry. in every sense of the word. And the other source of the English pub, Catholic source, that Bruning identifies, of course, there's this black legend that the medieval world was a static world. It was very monotonous. This isn't true at all. The medieval world was highly dynamic. There was all sorts of traveling to pilgrimage sites, to holy wells, between cities, a lot of cultural exchange, cosmopolitanism. St. Anselm of Canterbury was an Italian. And he talks about, of course, so to enable this dynamism, you had inns. And he points out that most, if not all, of England's oldest inns were monastic foundations, built in obedience to the charitable duty of hospitality. Every abbey, convent, and priory had its hospitium, or hostel for common travellers, while more elevated guests might put up in the abbot's own lodging.